Good morning and welcome to everybody who is online for this webinar. Welcome to our inaugural webinar on the virus, fake news and journalism. My name is Franz Kruger. I'm the head of department at Wits Journalism. I really hope that the technology is working for everyone who is online. Please use the chat function to message us if you do have a problem. We have somebody who is Tsepo, who is in the background, who will answer you if there is something on our end that we can help with. Please note that we've had way more interest than we anticipated, and we have had to open an additional channel for people who may not get access to the Zoom platform. That's on Facebook. You will see the live stream on the Journalism South Africa page. So that's facebook.com/Jokoza. So facebook.com/JOCOZA. I'd be interested to know who's here. We had a lot of international interest. I'm assuming there's a lot of South Africans. But if you're from outside South Africa, just type into the chat function where you're from. It'll be interesting for everyone to see how international, in fact, we are. I just want to show you one or two house rules, as it were. So here's our welcome. And in terms of housekeeping, we'll go through some inputs from our panelists. We really do welcome comments or questions. Please use the Q&A box that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. If you're on following us on Facebook Live, please post your questions in the comment section, and Tsepo will make sure that it's drawn to our attention. Tweet early, tweet often, as I always say. And please use the Wits Journalism webinar hashtag. We are recording, and we will make the recording publicly available. So just for form's sake also, that if you're participating, we take that as your agreement that we can do that. Just to say, we've got Glasgow, we've got Sweden, we've got Stellenbosch in Cape Town, we've got Ghana, Uganda, Denmark. It's fantastic to see such a wide range of countries, and I'm sure we will see more as we go along. You're all very, very welcome, and the international perspective will be most interesting as we go along. So we're newbies at this format, as I was saying to the panelists earlier, so please bear with us. We will be taking notes and learning from it. Like many others, we're trying to find new ways of connecting and keeping the conversation flowing. And of course, these are not just technical platforms, they also really affect the way in which we can interact. So for me, for instance, I have to forego the insights that come from seeing somebody's impatient foot tapping under a table and the like. On the other hand, I guess you have the opportunity of seeing a little corner of our personal lives in a way that you wouldn't if we were sitting in a seminar room. I found myself in webinars and playing the game of read the background. And I'm sure that now that I've mentioned it, we'll be doing the same. So the topic of discussion today is fake news, mis and disinformation, and journalism in a time of COVID-19. And I thought, just to kick us off, I would show you a story that I spotted, in fact, on EWN's website. The headline is "Makubo Worried About Implications of Alleged Misinformation in Alex." It's a small story about people who were queuing outside a school expecting food parcels. They were told there weren't any food parcels. They'd been told there were going to be food parcels, but they didn't arrive. And they were resistant. And of course, in the course of this, they were really not paying any attention to social distancing, and they resisted moving away. It was all I could find. I made some efforts to find some more information, and I mean, I must admit I didn't spend hours and hours searching, but I did look around for some further information on the story, and I couldn't find any. So I think there are two things that emerged for me from this fairly small item of news. Firstly, it just illustrates that the kind of misinformation that we're talking about has enormous power. And I'm not just talking about the power that comes with the sort of misinformation that we get from the president of the US. At a high level, of course, that is noteworthy and important and its own kind of issue. But it has enormous power at the level of grassroots. And I think at the level of the grassroots. And I think for me, one of the questions that really fascinates me is the reason why. I think part of the answer has to do with the resonance that these kind of stories have. They speak, I think, to some extent to our deepest fears about bodily integrity, about wellness, about survival in many ways, because people are losing their livelihoods in a very profound way. Also about connectedness. This business of being isolated is really very hard for a species of animal that are so deeply social. Secondly, I think the little story reveals a truth about journalism, particularly in South Africa, that has relevance to the topic today. As I said, there wasn't much more to be found, and perhaps I missed it, perhaps it was probably not a very significant story. But I think we have to recognize that as journalists, we have a real blind spot about the things that happen outside of our comfort zones in the disadvantaged areas. We hear a lot about the Gini coefficient, and as South Africans, we're very aware of the disparity between rich and poor. And I think we need a kind of Gini coefficient of information to measure the gap between the information rich and the information poor. Why is this relevant? It's relevant because it seems to me that misinformation lives and flourishes in spaces that are largely beyond the reach of journalism. It's in WhatsApp messages, it's in rumor, it's in the communications that take place between people who trust each other way more than they trust us. So here we are, we're talking about this as journalists. It matters to us, it matters to journalism, I think, and we really need to think about what is going on. Why is it so prevalent at this time? What are the patterns on our continent and in the rest of the world? What can be done to fight it? I've seen an enormous amount of stories, debunking stories, so to speak, which are going around. Does criminalizing work? There's been some concerns about media freedom in the light of some of the crackdowns that have been implemented. There's been concern about Hungary and other countries where that's happening. So this is what we want to talk about. And here joining me are three really well-suited, I think, panelists to help us unpick the topic. First, we have Claire Wardle, who's the director of First Draft. I'm not going to give people a whole detailed bio of the panelists. You can go online and have a look, but I will give you their Twitter handles so that you can follow them and tag them in your own tweets. So there's Claire Wardle of First Draft. We have Lee Mwiti, who's chief editor of Africa Check, based here in Johannesburg. And then Mahlatse Mahlase, editor-in-chief of Eyewitness News and the chair of the South African National Editors Forum. All three with particular perspectives and insights that I'm sure will be fascinating for us to hear. Without further ado then, I'd like to ask Claire to kick us off with a few minutes of opening thoughts on the topic. Claire.
Thanks
all the way
so much.
from New York, by the way, I should say, the epicenter of this whole thing. And I do need to acknowledge that she's here at 6 o'clock in the morning for her. So we really appreciate the willingness to wake up early for us. Claire, over to you.
Thank you, Franz, and apologies for the coffee, but I need something to power me. So it's a real pleasure to be talking with you. And I think the first point I want to make and why it's so appropriate that we're talking is, I mean, at First Draft, we monitor misinformation all the time. We've been doing so for 5 years. We've never had a story that at the same time, the world is struggling with the same rumors at the same time. So in WhatsApp groups in New York, there were messages talking about a lockdown in 72 hours. Those same messages with a slight twist were happening everywhere else. We're seeing mothers in New York sharing messages saying, put garlic in the corner of your houses because that will save you, or drink hot water. And I know that the same rumors are circulating around the rest of the world. So it's kind of astonishing to see how quickly these templates of misinformation are jumping borders. At this stage, we don't know whether this is malicious actors. I actually agree with Franz that this is a moment when everybody around the world, irrespective of your education level, irrespective of your background, we are all frightened. And as we know, when you're frightened, your brain stops being critical. And so I think the challenge we have right now is that people are sending messages to each other saying, this might not be true, but I love you and I want to make sure you're safe. So I'm sending this just in case. So even when you say to people, don't post misinformation on social media, they're like, oh no, I'm not. I just sometimes share on WhatsApp with my family and friends. Like, they see that as different. And it feels like, to me, it's almost like gossip. It's like a secret. Don't tell anybody. I think David's having an affair with Andrea, but don't tell anybody. And as we know, secrets never stay with one person, they get spread. And that's what we're seeing here. So we're seeing low-level misinformation about remedies, treatments, cures, but we're also seeing dangerous conspiracies around things like 5G telephone masks are causing coronavirus, or yesterday a survey in the US said that 30% of Americans think that the virus was created in a lab. So you've got these pretty dangerous conspiracies, and you've also got this kind of low-level misinformation about remedies. But just to say this, the aspect of it jumping borders is so powerful. 2 weekends ago, a very good friend of mine in London forwarded me a message that she'd seen on Facebook saying, is this true? And it was the one that circulated in South Africa about the nurse talking about all the devastation in a hospital, I think in Johannesburg or Cape Town. And so I did my verification and I said, no, look, here it is. And I think I found a story from South Africa. She was like, oh goodness, it sounded so awful. And that it was playing into her fears. And I think the second point I'll make quickly is we've never had a story where the facts are changing so quickly. So we'll hear from Lee about being a fact checker in an age of coronavirus. But a month ago, we were telling people not to wear masks on our faces. Now we're telling people wear masks. 6 weeks ago, we were saying, if you're under 60, you're fine. This virus won't cause any problems. Now young people are saying, oh, so if I could end up in hospital. And so it's very difficult to say to people, here are the facts, listen to the WHO, when these organizations are changing. What we do need to be saying is, this is a moment of crisis. So in the same way as a bushfire, the fire chief will say, this is what I know today. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but we're going to keep you informed. I think on this story, we need to be much more aware of the fact that things are changing as data develops, as we know more about the virus, our knowledge changes. And I think we have to be careful with our audiences, because I'm seeing declines in trust as people are starting to say the WHO is lying to us, the newsrooms are lying to us, the fact checkers, they've changed their minds. And I think we need to be more upfront with our audiences that we've never had a story like this where something so important is changing all the time. So there are two things that I think make this very unprecedented moment particularly difficult for those of us who work with truth and information.
Franz,
you're on mute, Franz.
Franz, you're muted.
It wouldn't be a webinar without somebody saying you're muted.
Thanks very much. I was multitasking. I was writing a response to somebody who was looking for Twitter handles and forgot that I'm muted. Thanks very much, Claire. That was very, very interesting. And I mean, what is so fascinating about this entire thing, as you say, is that these templates very often are universal. And I guess one of the things that academics at some point may like to do is to actually identify those different templates in terms of probably actually myths and stories that have been with us for many, many generations. Can I turn to Lee and ask you just to kick us off?
Thanks, Franz. Africa Check, we are present in 4 countries. We are here in South Africa, also in Kenya, Nigeria, and Senegal, which covers Francophone Africa for us. But also we have taken a key role in nurturing a network of fact checkers across the continent, because we believe it is important that every country is able to look to an established fact checker to at least give some more context to information. But I'll start off by saying that misinformation causes real harm to people's lives, health, finances, and to democracy. So this is very apparent from the quite frankly very unprecedented times that we find ourselves living in. Yet, I'll pick an example that Claire has just mentioned about conspiracy theories, and I'll say that it's not terribly new. The problem of misinformation has gotten a lot of attention in recent days with the rise of social networking. Yet, from what we've seen from previous health crises, there has been an attendant pandemic of misinformation. In the 80s, in the 1990s, 2000s, we saw the spread of dangerous misinformation around AIDS, that the HIV virus was created in a lab. Hello, we have the same kind of claim doing the rounds around the world. Or we saw a lot of claims that tests for the HIV virus were not unreliable. We've seen this here in Johannesburg, and led to some people being reluctant to do testing for COVID-19. We've seen the planting of unproven cures also in the same period when HIV/AIDS was in the news, such as goat's milk. We've seen a lot of cures right now. Essentially, we're seeing this again, but only at this time it's spreading at the speed of light and to a global audience. So in this conversation, I'm sure we will explore why misinformation around pandemics is evergreen. But I do think it speaks to the existence of a novel threat that we do not know how to deal with it. And that means we reach out for information that is easily relatable, or that makes sense to us. And a lot of times that tends to be that which is emotional, which then again means we do not have a rational or logical relationship with information, and the outcome then tends to be what we feel is a lot of misinformation. But I would say we have been here before. The entire information ecosystem, the government, the media, big tech, fact checkers such as ourselves, audiences, have a role to play in countering what definitely does feel like a groundswell of misinformation. But there are a number of questions I think we could ask as we go along. For example, can the media effectively step up to the plate in upholding public health at a time of fierce competition for audiences and dwindling audiences? We've seen hasty approaches from governments rolling out policies aimed at clamping down on disinformation. Some have criminalized the deliberate spreading of misinformation. But instead of looking to make this a crime, what if we offered better information to audiences instead? I think it's a slippery slope to nowhere if we go down the route of regulation of misinformation. I know Claire is a big advocate of alternative approaches, and look forward to examining this as we go on.
Thanks. We're already getting some really interesting comments in the chat function. And you raised a number of themes that we do need to take further. I mean, specifically, as you said at the end, around what works and what doesn't in terms of countering this. But let me first invite Mahlatse into the conversation. What is this all meaning for journalism? I mean, you're on the front line with this. How does it play out in the newsroom?
Good afternoon, and thank you very much. This comes at a very critical time, especially for South African media, but also for media across the continent. Sadly, it comes at a time when we have much smaller newsrooms, much more junior newsrooms, and the resources are not there, but this is the biggest story of our lifetime. I don't think that there's ever going to be anything this big in our lifetime, and that's demanding of journalism to show up like this very moment. This is a time where it's demanding that not only are we the conduit of information between the experts, the government, and the people, but also we are now finding ourselves, whether you're private or public media, having to play an educational role. For a lot of media organizations, especially private organizations, that's a role that they tend to shy away from. But what COVID has forced us to do is actually realize how important we are and play that educational role. I personally will say, in my own family environment and the 20 family WhatsApps that I belong to, literally I would spend half of my time trying to say, this is fake news, this is fake news. And then we realized, actually, this is quite widespread. As a newsroom, we also have to come to the party because the information is spreading so much in those WhatsApp groups, and people are believing this thing, and we have to play that role of actually countering. But obviously, sadly, we just don't have the capacity, and sometimes we are finding ourselves quite overwhelmed. I think what has happened, especially in South Africa, is that from December, when it was discovered, it was a foreign disease. And then we were reporting on it as a foreign story. And it took quite a while between that time and actually saying, as part of the world community, we are now also affected. And that lag you can see in how people reacted when government came and then said, now we are going to have these regulations because we are also affected as a country. And people then went through this desperation for information. So that's when those that are spreading the misinformation took advantage and then started these conversations. The sad thing about it is sometimes it is really individuals sitting in their homes bored and are deliberately causing panic. I mean, just for example, we've had in South Africa somebody arrested who had recorded himself saying that don't agree when government wants to test you. Those tests are actually are going to infect you with the virus. And this is somebody sitting in their home, recording themselves on video. This is despite government saying that we are going to criminalize the sharing of fake news, but somebody did that. I come from a township called Seshego in Limpopo, and somebody manipulated the SABC logo, and at the bottom wrote that, you know, my township had about 50 infections. And can you imagine the kind of panic that happened and how quickly that news spread? We also had somebody creating a university press release claiming that they had positive coronavirus infections within the university community. And that caused a lot of panic. And as media houses, we've had to then step in and say, this is not true, this is actually fake news. And can you imagine having to do that and still do the work that is required of us, which is to provide information, which is to say, these are the government rules that government has put in place. This is what experts are saying. And as Claire was saying, we are learning on the go. And while I saw, in the beginning, I saw this as an opportunity for media houses to basically show up and rebuild that trust relationship with community, it doesn't help that experts are also changing their minds every single day. And as Claire was saying, on something as basic as masks, we were requested by experts a few weeks ago to run a story that says, please do not use masks, let's leave them for the health professionals. And then exactly a week later, they came back to us to say, okay, let's now tell people to say that we are now saying to them they must wear masks. So somebody who's listening to us, who's reading us as the South African media is saying, do these people know what they're talking about? And they don't realize that we are also receiving information from the experts. So it's a moment for journalism, but it's not one where we're just going to ride into the sunset and celebrate that we are doing a great job. Unfortunately, it's one that is just going to be one where we have to continuously build on that relationship.
Yeah, thanks, Mahlatse, and thanks for highlighting the extra workload, in a sense, that that all of this imposes on journalists. I mean, we're supposed to be out there covering, or perhaps in there, in many cases from behind our laptops, covering what's going on, and rather than simply debunking various stories that are simply incorrect. Let me hear from all three of you. I mean, is there some malice in this as a rule, or is this just feeding off itself in some kind of way? What is your experience, Claire, Lee, Mahlatse?
So I would say, I mean, whenever you look at mis and disinformation, disinformation is people who are deliberately creating content to cause harm. And there are three main categories. The first is people doing it for financial gain. And we've certainly seen lots of scammers and hoaxers trying to sell remedies and other things right now. So financial is the first. The second is political. When we have political disinformation, it might be foreign actors, it might be domestic actors, but you're trying to, you know, improve your candidate's position. The third is social and psychological, and that's exactly what you're talking about. People who just do it to see if they can get away with it. And they're doing it in their bedrooms to get their own kicks, to see what's possible. And for those of us who are nice, it's very difficult to understand why these people would do it. But it's not just on COVID, it happens all the time. And unfortunately, there are people who deliberately try to hoax journalists because they want journalists to amplify the rumor. So they target journalists with false press releases, or they create content with a false logo. They see journalists as a target so that they can actually amplify their messages. So yeah, it's really difficult to understand, but we've seen it, for a very long time, why hoaxers do this.
So let me pick up on another question that was posted in the Q&A from Marinette Jordan, I think, in Stellenbosch. When should the media debunk misinformation or malinformation, and when should so-called fake news just be ignored so as not to amplify it further? Mahlatse, do you want to respond to that?
It's really difficult to decide. What we decided in our newsroom really was you kind of evaluate just how quickly it's spreading, and also how dangerous it is. Then you start, I mean, there's been videos of somebody claiming to be a nurse in Saudi Arabia and giving tips on how people should survive, something like that. We tend to ignore it. But when you start having, for example, this man in Cape Town who recorded himself, that is quite dangerous, because you, on the one moment, from a public interest point of view, you need people to actually be tested, and you've got this video that's going viral that is saying to people, don't actually do it. So the public interest part still applies in this regard. Then there were other instances, especially when we were still in the early days on the African continent. I don't know if you guys remember, there was a voice note that circulated quite widely of somebody pretending to be holding a press conference in a hospital in Kenya, and basically saying that they are confirming cases of COVID. The way it was done, it sounded so authentic, as in the person started off with, "Can you hear me? Are all the media houses here? Can we start?" And it really, when you were listening to it, it felt like a press conference that you were also sitting in. And something like that, we decided, let's debunk this one. It's quite important that we actually do. So that decision of when do we debunk and when do we not, it's an everyday decision, but some of them are so glaring that we really just decide this one has spread quite quickly enough. It sounds too real to people. It's causing a lot of panic. Let's step in as the media. And that's why I'm saying we are finding ourselves playing even that educational role. Guys, this is not true. Let's find an expert to say this is not true.
Thanks. I've got a comment here from Juanita Williams of All Africa, who says that she belongs to various WhatsApp groups of African journalists, and every single one of them has journalists sharing misinformation as if they're sharing news and defending those messages. She says we speak about fake news as if reporters aren't part of it, but clearly not. What kind of action should be taken in those circumstances? Lee, thoughts?
I think I retain quite an interest in the sociological aspect of it, because, our experience has been, we expected we'd find, because we do a lot of fact checking pretty much every week around the pandemic, we expected that most of what we would be fact checking would be false cures and vaccines, because, you'd think people do want to, there's hope should they contract the virus, but a large part of what the bulk of what we've been dealing with has been out of context video and image. And the thing happens to be that you've got a video or an image that is real, but the context around it is not, or it's been weaponized. So essentially, this kind of information tends to speak a lot to people because there's a kernel of truth in it. There is some truth to the claim, to the misinformation that is being shared. But again, the context is something that we do not get right. So our interest in understanding the circumstances that create room for misinformation of this nature, has always been that we think there's an information overload. Yeah, actually the World Health Organization has described it as such, as an infodemic, meaning there's an abundance of information, some of it accurate, a lot of it that is not accurate. And people are finding it difficult to find trustworthy sources of information or reliable information when they most need it. And as Claire mentioned, further compounding this has been a lack of factual information as to the origins of the threat and conflicting guidance as to how we can best protect ourselves and our loved ones. So we have what is essentially a sense of chaos that has left us grasping for simple explanations that we instinctively feel to be true. And this is what creates room for misinformation to put down its roots and thrive. Because the alternative is an explanation that is not palatable to many, that very little about COVID-19 is understood, and that is psychologically very discomforting. So, you know, because we have a lot of emotional reaction to information, then I always hesitate to ascribe malice to people who spread misinformation. Sure, there are those reasons, such as, you know, making money out of it, that you can see this is obviously something that is a problem. But in terms of why people actually spread misinformation, I think there's a lot that we need to learn, we need to research in. But to answer the question as to what point do we jump in, I think it's a tricky slope, because say you are a government that is looking to legislate, or you are big tech that is advocating for global regulation of misinformation. At what point do you draw a line between freedom of expression and information that causes us harm generally as a society? What data are you relying on to make these decisions? Do you even have the capacity to police regulation of such information? So I think it is tricky to essentially say this is at the point at which we jump in. I mean, there are those cases that are obviously cut and dry. For example, if it's hate speech or someone urging negative action against minority groups, I think those are easy to deal with existing regulation and laws. But then when it comes to information, I think it's a conversation that we must have as the larger society.
Thanks very much. I mean, the question really is what to do about journalists when they're misinforming people.
Look, I think journalists also are a product of our environment. I think, and Mahlatse mentioned it, a lot has gone into journalism in recent years. We've seen a decline in investment in newsrooms, and that also speaks to a decline in advancing the skills of journalists in terms of they being able to.
So it's a question of training, really. Lee is just frozen there on my screen, at least. Can I invite Zoe Titus from Namibia, who had a point on the Q&A, if she's able just to make the point very briefly in the discussion. Zoe?
Unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. We are supporting a lot of journalists and civil society groups here in Namibia, and making, along with Namibia Fact Check, several attempts to provide what we believe as relevant, verified information. But increasingly, as I have indicated in my question, these attempts are unsuccessful, because people will maintain that they have a particular point of view on an issue and are not really interested in hearing an alternative view. And that is becoming a problem.
Thanks very much. So you're really saying that the debunking works up until the point where people are kind of just in their own echo chambers and just are looking for confirmation of what they in any event believe in. And I think that's something that we always have to bear in mind, I think, in journalists is in a sense what the mindset that people bring into a piece of news or into receiving a piece of news. I want to really turn to this question of what's to be done about it. I've had a couple of comments here. Anton Harbour from our department asks the question about criminalizing, whether that really is an appropriate response, as we've seen in some countries, including South Africa, and what that might mean for freedom of speech. I see Dinesh Balia, also from our department, is asking whether we don't need bigger consequences on transparency for journalists who produce incorrect information, such as Gates and the vaccine. She says it seems like a double standard when non-media are so vilified and in South Africa now criminalized for producing, sharing disinformation. So can I hear from, let's start with Mahlatse. What's the best thing to do to counter this kind of disinformation? And what is our attitude to criminalizing false stories of this kind?
I think with the South African laws that were created to criminalize it, the one big thing is intent. I think that is quite a big differentiator between somebody who's sitting in their house in Cape Town and recording himself saying, don't allow yourself to be tested, and perhaps a media house getting something wrong. And I think when they do get it wrong, it exposes the editorial checks that failed in that particular story. And I think the principles still apply, where we expect those media houses to immediately correct any wrong information that they put out there. And I think we shouldn't then say that the laws that have now been put in place are replacing the press council and the press code, because that would be a very dangerous road for South African media. We know when the state gets to decide what is fake news, whether something was intentional or not, what the consequences on media freedom would be. And I don't think we should ever risk that. I think while we acknowledge that government needed to do something because of the public interest and protecting people because of this health pandemic, we still need to allow the media to be able to do its work. Yes, the media carries a lot of responsibility at this time. And when they do get it wrong, it takes us back as a whole industry, because the consequences are even larger and that trust relationship is further eroded. But I think what then it means is that media houses have to ensure that their own systems are in check and they're even strengthened and stronger than before, which sadly would require media companies to actually do the investment in journalism at this time to ensure that, you know, if there was 2 layers of editorial checks, let's add a 3rd one, because it's just a time where we can't afford to get anything wrong. But I don't think we should then throw away the press code and the self-regulation mechanisms that we have put in place, and also recognize that the media is not intentionally misleading. Yes, there might have been failures in the editorial checks, but it was not intentional.
Claire, I know you have views on what's best done to debunk and to counter this kind of flood of misleading information.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would, on this case, I think, yes, the media's got a really important role to play, but we also know there are many people who don't actually come into contact with the mainstream news. And the question is, how do we reach those people? And I thought Zoe's question, which is about how do we, from a kind of a peer-to-peer perspective, we need to do more to engage with communities, because actually some of these points, we shouldn't be amplifying through the mainstream media. We should be finding the communities where these rumors are spreading, and we should be using peer-to-peer, because actually if the mainstream media says you're wrong, here's a fact check that tells you you're wrong. If you've got very strong opinions, it's unlikely that that fact check is going to move you. If you have somebody else in the community say, hey, listen, I saw that you posted that. You know, I've got the same stuff. Like, I'm seeing a lot of this circulating, but I'm worried, like, what's this doing right now to our community? Like, I think this stuff is divisive, or I think this stuff is designed to cause harm. Like, I want to work with you. Like, how can we help one another? And actually what we need is more of that, as opposed to this is the right information and we're going to tell you. The mainstream media, fact checkers have got a really important role to play, but we should be doing more to engage with community leaders, faith leaders, other people, the person who runs a family WhatsApp group. Like, how can we all become information providers right now and kind of change the norm to say, we can't just see this as frivolous. It doesn't matter if you share it with your family. If it's wrong, it's like drunk driving. It's inappropriate to do it because right now it's causing harm. And so I think we have to change the way that we talk about this. And I would say in the last 4 years, yes, there's been lots of discussions about fake news, but I don't think we've taken it as seriously as we need to right now because of the pandemic. So I think it's how do we connect newsrooms with communities in a much, much stronger way.
I mean, many journalists would say that's not our job. We don't have time. You know, we do what we do.
I know, but as you said, like, this is a new, like, we're having to do different things. Newsrooms previously didn't like to do things that looked like education. I just think the times have changed. We have to find other ways, more innovative ways, also to take the pressure off the newsroom. Mahlatse shouldn't have to be in 20 family WhatsApp groups debunking. Like, how can we get kind of like lots and lots of concerned citizens to help play that role? I think we just haven't thought creatively about ways that we can do that.
I think, you know,
these organizations now have audience engagement editors whose, I suppose, job reaches into that kind of space, doesn't it? Mahlatse, you wanted to come in?
I also wanted to say, I mean, just listening to the radio in the past few weeks, I've been impressed with South African radio, from community to public radio stations to even private, because what they've done also is allow communities to pose questions directly to experts that they have in studio. And that allows to at least not the media doing it, but somebody else correcting the false information that is out there. And perhaps the fact that we are all as a country, as the world, talking one topic, and that topic needs to move consistently and people need to be creative in their content. We're seeing a lot more public-driven conversations on our radio stations, and then allowing for people to talk to each other, to say, you know, whilst we are isolated in your own house, the radio is providing that friend that you can talk to, and whatever concerns or what you're hearing in your family WhatsApp group, you're able to bring it to the fore. And then the radio stations, as opposed to, you know, then allow for experts to come on and say, just to correct, these are the factual information. So we are playing that role increasingly. And I think this is when you also start to realize the power of community radio stations, where they are able to pick up quite quickly what is happening on the ground within those communities, and they can quickly respond to it. And when they find experts that are local, that are familiar with the audiences, then it's not a preaching to, but it's more a conversation, and that can actually go a long way.
Maybe I can jump in.
Yes,
just slightly. I think I would pick up on Mahlatse's point. It's very important that we have local solutions. I have been in lots of meetings around the world where the premise has been a one-size-fits-all solution has been sold, whether it's been around artificial intelligence or you know, just generally how to fight back against misinformation. But for example, we in the Global South communicate very much differently compared to the Global North. Our issues are, say, more existential. We don't have as much ideological cleavages as, for example, in the US. So we need to understand our audiences and how they are affected by this misinformation. And a lot of the people who are most vulnerable tend to be in the communities. And you know, these are the people who, for example, are victims of a healthcare system that is fractured, where they do not have enough resources or enough places to seek treatment. And those are the people who are not getting the information. So it's important that we focus on solutions that are relevant to our current environment.
And that speaks to a comment that was made again by Marinette Jordan from Stellenbosch about solutions-based journalism, if I remember correctly. You know, that there also needs to be that kind of writing. I think we're all grappling with the reality of this for now, and as various of you have said, I mean, the information that's even coming from the experts is shifting so quickly. We're running quickly out of time, and I just wanted to highlight one question that was posed by Susanna Anbu. How can a news agency strike a balance as to keeping the public well informed and not bombard them with an influx of information that can instill panic? Any very quick response from any one of you?
I think it's
a balance between informing and not causing panic. Mahlatse.
I think it's not only the media, unfortunately, that can help in that regard, where you actually have the government silent and not communicating to people the right information, then that's when we are creating an environment for misinformation to actually stick and to hold. So, for example, we had a conversation with our government to say, while we appreciate the leadership of the Minister of Health, we also need to start hearing the scientists come to the fore and actually speaking more and interacting with the public. And for example, in South Africa, that press conference that we saw on Easter Monday, where you had the advisor to the minister who is an expert in their own right speaking and not necessarily the politician, that starts to comfort people a lot more. So I think finding that balance, it's a combination of factors. Yes, it's the media doing its work and choosing very carefully the kind of stories they're doing and how they're covering it. But I also think the government and those that advise them and those that are in charge coming forward and speaking, then you are then silencing or at least overpowering this false information that is actually going on.
Thanks very much. I think we need to begin to draw this to a close. There are many questions and comments in the Q&A stream that we're not going to be able to get to, but let me just run through one or two of them. I mean, Andrew Donaldson makes the point that these issues are just as dangerous as the pandemic itself. Issues with the government's own information flows. William Bird has earlier said that, of course, the South African regulations are fairly tightly framed. I think in answer to this concern about criminalizing fake news, I think that's true for South Africa, but I think in some other countries we do have to worry, as Zoe Titus has said, that this opportunity will be used by would-be despots to close down on rights that we will then struggle to get back. There is, Zoe Titus makes that point. William Bird also draws attention to the narrow framing, as I've said. Of course, MMA, his organization, runs a very effective reporting service for fake news, which we encourage people to use. There is a question here that we won't be able to get to around Bill Gates, that particular story, which is perhaps our poster child for false stories that went out, but I think that was a very particular case. Twitter, I mean, the question about platforms coming from two different quarters, Ilka Parkendorf and Anton Harber. Has somebody got a very quick response to that? Are the platforms doing enough to deal with the problem?
I'll just very quickly say, I think that we've seen more in the last 4 weeks than we've seen in the last 5 years. And that's because there isn't anybody saying, we want more coronavirus misinformation. And normally they're frightened about, taking big steps. I do worry as ever that there's no transparency about the decisions that they're taking. But I think what they've shown is they can take these actions, and that's positive. They were not ready for something this scale. And my frustration is in the US, you have people writing opinion pieces in the New York Times, been like, oh, well done, platforms, you've done more. And you're like, in English, you've done better. There's absolutely no way that this is actually working at the levels that it needs to around the world in other types of languages. So yeah, it's better than it has been. It's still a very, very long way away from where we need the platforms to be in terms of working with many different people around the world to ensure that this kind of content doesn't travel quickly. WhatsApp stopping the forwarding more than one person, that was a good move, but I would like to see more from all of them.
Yeah, could do better, as one's primary school child might get in a report, right? So I want to draw this to a close, though it feels a very incomplete discussion. I mean, obviously we, in an hour, as we've given ourselves this morning or this afternoon, there's a lot of ground to cover and we simply can't cover it all. But I think what we take away from this is a sense that really this is an incredibly important issue. It's unprecedented in many ways. The scale of it is unprecedented. And I think we're going to have to do a lot more talking and a lot more thinking about what is going on and the different kinds of implications that has for journalism. I want to thank the three panelists, Claire in early morning New York, Mahlatse in Johannesburg, and Lee also in Johannesburg, and also a great thanks to Tsepo Chabalala who set it up for us and kept the wheels turning. As I said at the beginning, this is we're newbies at this, as I suppose many of us are, at running a discussion in this form, and so apologies for the break in the middle, and apologies for the fact that we haven't got to all of the queries, but thanks for them anyway. We have recorded, and we will post the recording in some suitable space. We will take this discussion further. Quite likely we'll do another discussion of this sort in a week's time, although probably with a slightly different focus. It seems to me that there are many implications of this pandemic for the media that we need to think about. One of the obvious ones is around the economic impact. We've seen threats of retrenchment, we've seen threats of closure in South Africa and in other places. And of course, there are many other things to talk about. So thank you all. Thanks to the people who listened in and participated by way of Q&A. Thanks to the panelists. And we'll talk again. Please feel free to continue the discussion on Twitter. We've posted the handles. I'll actually put those up again just for the close. Actually, I won't because I don't have it in front of me now. But we have posted those details, so you should have them, and we can continue that as we go along. Thanks very much, and have a good rest of the day and rest of the week, wherever you are.